Are you ready to be better positioned for success at work and happiness in life? Are you ready to generate new solutions to old problems? And do you want to learn more from people around you and live with fewer regrets? Then hang tight. Have we got the answers for you? Or maybe not. We'll let you decide for yourself after this episode. Hi friends, Kalina here from Eat, Read, Sleep, a community that gets together to vibe with books. A community that we invite you to join and be a part of the movement to bring books to our everyday lives.
That's right, y'all. I'm Tapas, and today we'll be bringing into our lives and hopefully to yours the #1 New York Times best-selling book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know by Adam Grant.
Yes, this book is about the value of rethinking. It's about adopting mental flexibility and, most importantly, encouraging that same agility in others.
So let's explore how rethinking actually happens. This book is broken down into 3 sections. The first section will focus on opening our minds. The second section will look at how we can encourage others to think again.
And the third section is about how we can create communities of lifelong learners, something that resonates with our purpose here at Eat, Read, Sleep. So, if you're ready to let go of knowledge and opinions that no longer serve you, and if you're ready to anchor your senses of self in flexibility rather than consistency, come join us on this book summary for Think Again.
Let's do it. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything, said George Bernard Shaw. Many of us take pride in our knowledge and expertise. We like to stay true to our beliefs and opinions, which makes sense if we lived in a stable world. Problem is that we live in a rapidly changing world. This means we need to spend as much time rethinking as we do thinking. And doesn't it seem like people are quick to recognize when other people need to think again? I mean, how often do you call up a different friend when one tells you something you don't like?
Oh yeah, all the time.
We cling to what we know or what we want to hear because questioning ourselves requires us to admit that the facts have changed and that we may have been wrong all this time. So when it comes to our own knowledge and opinions, we often favor feeling right over being right. What we have to remember is that rethinking is a skill set, but it's also a mindset.
My turn. Shoo. And when it comes to mindsets, research shows that as we think and talk, we often slip into the mindset of 3 different professions, each with a distinct set of tools: preachers, prosecutors, and politicians. Let's take a look at these. Preacher mode activates when our sacred beliefs are in jeopardy. We deliver sermons to protect and promote our ideals. Prosecutor mode happens when we recognize flaws in other people's reasonings. This is when we get caught up in arguments to prove them wrong.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
And lastly, there's the politician. We shift into the politician mode when we want to win over an audience. We do things like campaign and lobby for approval.
The risk is that we become so wrapped up in preaching that we are right, prosecuting others who are wrong, and politicking for support, we don't even bother to rethink our own views. The good news is that there is a 4th mindset that can free us from all these risks, the mindset of a scientist. If you're a scientist by trade, rethinking is your fundamental profession. You are expected to doubt what you know, be curious about what you don't know, and update your views based on the new data.
So it makes sense that being a scientist is more than just a profession. It's a frame of mind to constantly search for the truth. In psychology, there are 2 biases that prevent us from applying our intelligence. One is confirmation bias, seeing what we expect to see. The other is desirability bias, seeing what we want to see. That's where scientist mode can come in to help us lead with questions and puzzles versus starting with answers and solutions. It allows us to be actively open-minded, to search for reasons why we might be wrong versus why we might be right. After all, the purpose of learning is not to affirm our beliefs, but to evolve our beliefs.
So let's look at 2 types of thinking cycles. Scientific thinking favors humility over pride, doubt over certainty, curiosity over closure. When we shift out of the scientist mode, the rethinking cycle breaks down, and what we have is the overconfidence cycle. Take a second to look at this and ask yourself which cycle you commonly find yourself in. Remember that the curse of knowledge is that it closes our minds to what we don't know. Good judgment depends on us having the skill and the willingness to open our minds.
Have you ever heard of the armchair quarterback syndrome? It's when confidence is greater than competence. You guys know anyone that comes off so confident that they could say anything and you'd probably believe them? Well, the opposite of armchair quarterback syndrome is something you've probably heard of before: imposter syndrome. This is where competence exceeds confidence. This is when someone who believes they don't deserve their success. They're genuinely unaware of just how intelligent, creative, or charming they are, and no matter how much they hear otherwise, they can't rethink their views of themselves. The ideal level of confidence lies between being an armchair quarterback and an imposter. Let's go find that sweet spot.
Okay, so what we want to attain is actually called confident humility. Sounds weird, right? Humility is often misunderstood. One of the Latin roots for humility means from the earth. It's about being grounded and recognizing that we're all flawed and fallible. So confident humility is about having faith in our capability while appreciating that we may not have all the right answers or questions.
All right, let's go back to imposter syndrome. If we think again and look at imposter syndrome as more than judging it as a disorder, we may find that the fears of imposter syndrome may be beneficial to us. Embracing imposter syndrome can give us 3 benefits of doubt. First, the upside of feeling like an imposter is that it can motivate us to work harder by driving us to keep running to the end so that we can earn our place among the finalists. Second, imposter thoughts can motivate us to work smarter. When we don't believe we're going to win, we have nothing to lose by rethinking our strategy. And third, feeling like an imposter can make us better learners. Having doubts about our knowledge or skills takes us off a pedestal and encourages us to seek out insights from others. Great thinkers don't harbor doubts because they're imposters. They maintain doubts because they are aware of blind spots, which everyone has, and they're committed to improving their sight.
Now that's what you call thinking again. Let's switch over and talk about the type of joy that many people may not consider, the joy of being wrong.
Number 1, how dare you?
When an interesting idea challenges an opinion or something of minor importance to us, we often get really excited about it. But when a belief is questioned, people tend to shut down. Imagine a tiny miniature dictator living inside our heads, controlling the flow of facts in our minds. In psychology, the technical term for a dictator is the totalitarian ego, and its job is to keep out threatening information. In neuroscience, this is the activation of the amygdala activating into our flight or fight response. So together, you have this very visceral feeling of anger and fear, like you've been punched in the mind. The totalitarian ego comes to the rescue with a mental armor. This is when the preacher and the prosecutor mode gets activated. After all, discovering you are wrong only means you are now less wrong than before.
Something to keep in mind: we aren't born with our opinions. We have full control and choice over what we believe is true. Why then do we find ourselves attached to ideas? Attachment is what keeps us from recognizing when our opinions are off the mark and rethinking them. To unlock the joy of being wrong, we need to detach. Let's look at 2 kinds of detachment: detaching your present from your past and detaching your opinions from your identity. When detaching your past self from your current self, it might be helpful to look at this diagram and identify which pair of circles best describes how you see yourself. Rethinking who you are and evolving from your past is a means of mental health. Studies have shown that detaching from your past selves reduces depression. And as the Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio once said, if you don't look back at yourself and think, wow, how stupid was I a year ago, then you must not have learned much in the last year. The second kind of detachment requires you to separate your opinions from your identity. Who you are should be a question of what you value, not what you believe. Values are core principles in life, like generosity or integrity. And when you base your identity on these kinds of principles, you are enabled to remain open-minded and have the best ability to advance.
You must unlearn what you have learned, said the great and only Master Yoda. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and that's absolutely true. But Grant modifies that and tells us that we are entitled to hold opinions inside our own heads, though. If we only choose to express them out loud, it's our responsibility to ground them in logic and facts. share reasoning with others, and change our minds when better evidence emerges. If you're not used to the joy of being wrong, and most people aren't, remember that psychologists have found that admitting being wrong doesn't make us look less competent. In fact, it's a display of honesty and willingness to learn. Will Smith said it well when he said, "Taking responsibility is taking your own power back." It's a sign of wisdom to avoid believing every thought that enters our own mind. And it's a mark of emotional intelligence to avoid internalizing every feeling that enters our hearts. When you form an opinion, ask yourself what would have to happen to prove it false. In fact, every time we encounter new information, we have a choice. We can attach our opinions to our identities and stand our ground in the stubbornness of preaching and prosecuting, or we can operate like scientists, defining ourselves as people committed to the pursuit of truth, even if it means proving our own views wrong.
We've all heard of the movie title Fight Club, but let's think again and consider the good Fight Club. In most situations, there are two types of conflicts that stand out: relationship conflict, personal emotional clashes that are filled not just with friction but also with animosity, and task conflict, clashes about ideas and opinions. Where to go for dinner, whom to hire, which book to read next. In a working environment, relationship conflict is generally bad for performance. Clashes get personal and emotional, people become self-righteous preachers, spiteful prosecutors of the other side, or single-minded politicians dismissing opinions of the other side. But task conflict at work can be beneficial and constructive when it brings diversity of thought. This prevents people from getting trapped in the overconfidence cycle. It helps colleagues stay humble and make them curious about what they might be missing. It leads to thinking again, moving them closer to the truth without damaging relationships. So, when you think of the good Fight Club, remember that being able to fight doesn't just make us more civil, it also develops our creative muscles. The absence of conflict is not harmony, it's apathy.
Okay, I'm gonna be really honest here, guys. I've always been a people pleaser, and I'm sure you are too, or you know somebody who is. So guys, check out this table. Do you avoid conflict and fall into one of these categories? It's okay, because being a people pleaser or being agreeable is one of the major personality traits around the world. On the other side, you have what Grant calls disagreeable people. But it's not a bad thing. You see, disagreeable people get a bad rap because the stereotype is that they are critical and complain and suck the fun out of everything.
Hey!
But if we think again, we recognize that disagreeable people are fearless about questioning the way things have been done, and they hold us accountable for thinking again. They speak up more frequently, especially when leaders aren't receptive. They foster more task conflict. They give the critical feedback we may not want to hear, but need to hear it. Agreeable people make for a great support network. They're excited to encourage us and cheerleader for us. But if rethinking is required, if we need people to trust to point out our blind spots and help us overcome our weaknesses, disagreeable people is a network that we need.
Yeah. So how do we take what we've learned about rethinking and help open the minds of others? When we approach any type of argument or conflict, it's important to reframe the conversation as a debate. A debate helps both parties find common ground, removes hostility, and keeps the topic about ideas instead of emotions. Remember that a good debate is not a war. So how do you debate? Grant gives us a few steps to take. First, demonstrate openness by acknowledging that you agree with your critic. Even share what you've learned from them. This settles a common ground. Make sure you avoid defend-attack spiral. That's dismissively shooting down the other side and then doubling down on your own beliefs. Don't come on too strong or step on anyone's toes, and limit the amount of data that can dilute your strongest points. And the most important step, allow the audience to make their own case. Psychologists have found that the person most likely to persuade you to change your mind is you. You get to pick the reasons you find most compelling, and you come away with a real sense of ownership. Taking all these steps will help you ask genuine questions, leave the other party intrigued to learn more, and open their mind to the possibility that they might be wrong. Their natural curiosity will do the rest.
Okay, Cal, you said might. What about the cases where that's just not enough? What if hostility enters the picture? In these instances, it's recommended to have a conversation about the conversation. What does that mean? Shift the attention away from the actual disagreement and towards the process of having a dialogue. Comment on their feelings about the process. You can even ask, what evidence would change your mind? Expressing less conviction will also help your cause. That's because communicating with uncertainty signals confident humility, invites curiosity, and leads to a more nuanced discussion. When you ask questions rather than think for the audience, you invite them to join you as a partner and think for themselves. Approaching an argument as a war means that there are winners and losers, but viewing it as a back and forth dance will allow you to choreograph a way forward and with a much better chance of finding rhythm together.
Alright, so let's dance into something we call motivational interviewing. It's rare to motivate someone to change their mind, so we're better off helping them find their own motivation to change. And this is how we can do it. Ask open-ended questions, engage in reflective listening, affirm the other person's desire and ability to change, and summarize the conversation. In part 1, we learned how asking questions can help with self-persuasion. Motivational interviewing goes a step further to guide others to self-discovery. Now let's talk about something that I'm not really good at. Hopefully this confident humility is charming you to keep watching this video. I'm not really good at listening.
You can say that again.
But Grant sure is helping me learn to listen a little bit better. I've learned that listening well is more than a matter of talking less. It's a set of skills in asking and responding, showing more interest in another person's interest. It's a display of respect and an expression of care. Listening is a way of offering others our scarcest, most sacred gift, our attention. Having this skill set will help your audience approach their own values with more humility and curiosity. When you interact as a non-judgmental, attentive listener, people are naturally less anxious and defensive. This gives them a chance to truly express themselves out loud, which often leads to discoveries of new thoughts that allow self-reflection and willingness to listen to the opposing side.
Applying rethinking to different parts of our life so that we can keep learning at every stage of our lives includes impacting the world around us. Our beliefs are shaped by our motivations. What we believe depends on what we want to believe. So how do you convince a world of differences to understand each other? Binary bias presumes that the world is divided into two sides, believers and non-believers. It's a human tendency to seek clarity and closure by simplifying complex ideologies into black and white answers. If we take a look at charged topics, it's important to know that psychologists have found that people will ignore or even deny the existence of a problem if they aren't fond of the solution. However, if we unsimplify the problem, meaning we show a more complex version of the issue, people actually identify common ground, feel more humility about their knowledge, and are more likely to understand each other. How do we create such complexity? Introduce a nuance, which is the topic. By introducing shades of gray in the topic, you open up the conversation for discussion versus making absolute statements that can shut down others. Then you convey caveats. These are limitations to our knowledge. And finally, highlight contingencies, situations where the effect may differ. Acknowledging complexities makes you more credible.
Have you heard of the expression of putting yourself in another person's shoes? The idea is to gain a better understanding of their perspective. But if we think again, we'll recognize that perspective taking consistently fails because we're terrible mind readers. Well, unless you really are a psychic mind reader. But to the rest of us, what works is not perspective taking, but perspective seeking. Actually talking to people to gain insights into the nuances of their views. Now, there are those of the thought that the best way to make conversations less polarizing is to leave emotions out of them. But it turns out that even if we disagree strongly with someone on a social issue, striking up a conversation and understanding why they care about something allows us to trust them. Now, you may still dislike that person, but their passion becomes a sign of integrity. You can still reject their belief, but you grow to respect the person behind the belief. This is what makes for a productive versus a non-productive conversation of differences.
If we are rethinking on how to create communities of lifelong learners, we have two groups that are largely impactful: our educational school system and the working world. So for our schools, it's important to rewrite the textbook on a system which we currently use to teach. Textbooks, lecturing, and presentations all lead to a passive teaching and what Grant calls the dumbstruck effect. This presumes that we are learning about other people's false beliefs. What has been shown to be more effective is active learning, where we encourage our children to think like fact checkers, interrogate information instead of simply consuming it, reject rank and popularity as a proxy for reliability, and understand that the sender of information is often not its source. Another approach is to think, pair, share. This starts with kids individually thinking on the problem, then updating their ideas in a small group, and finally presenting their thoughts, arriving at the solutions together. This encourages the idea of multiple drafts or versions of the answers until the final product is produced. Now, when we look at the companies and the workforce, we must also apply that rethinking is not just an individual skill, it's a collective capability, and it depends heavily on the organization's culture to promote it. Learning, vulnerability, and psychological safety is to foster a climate of respect, trust, and openness in which people can raise concerns and suggestions without fear of reprisal. This is the foundation of a learning culture.
So what's the final conclusion of this book? We need to escape tunnel vision. Careers, relationships, communities, they're all constantly in flux because they are open systems. They aren't closed off from the environments around them. And that means it's critical for us to have frequent check-ins or check-ups to see if what we're doing is in line with our identity. Remember that when we chase happiness, it starts from within. From one of my favorite authors, Ernest Hemingway, you can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of meaning, you just have to think again.
Progress is impossible without change.
We shift into the politician mode. Stop giggling! you're standing here like a little bodyguard. Would you like to go?
3, 2, 1.
You guys know. Have you ever heard of the Armchair? We've all heard of the movie title, The Fight Club. But let's think again.
Have you seen the Fight Club?
No.
Okay. Fight Club.
Fight Club. Okay.
Fight Club.
Why? What's the difference? This.
Movie.
It's a display. It's a display. It doesn't help that you're just standing facing backwards.
Will Smith says it really well when he said, taking responsibility. Taking responsibility. Learning, vulnerability, and psychological safety. Learning, vulnerability, and psychological safety. Learning and psychological safety. And psychological safety. Psychological safety is psychological safety. Why not? Now I'm gonna mess up even more.